This is a Going Back, Remembering UGA interview with Dr. Robert Bowen, conducted by Fran on July 17, 2007. Today we're at the University of Georgia Visitor Center in the Four Towers building on College Station Road in Athens, Georgia. Good morning and thank you for being with us today, Dr. Bowen.
Good morning. I'm looking forward to it.
Let's start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about your early days.
Deep South city, major city, even including New Orleans and Montgomery and places like that. It was on the Mississippi River. It was the center of cotton production and sale, so it was Deep South. I moved to Birmingham when I entered the 10th grade in school, and Birmingham was an industrial city, and in many ways much more like a northern city than Deep South, although it had all of the, actually, after I left there, it had the worst Deep South there was. I went to high school, incidentally, with Haywood Allen, who was captain of the University of Georgia football team. He was a couple of years older than I was, and then went to Birmingham Southern in 1940. And in 1943, I had joined the Air Corps pilot training program and was not to be called in until I finished my degree. And in 1943, they thought I had all the education I needed, and they decided I could come on in.
Ready for you to come.
So I went in the service, went into the pilot training program, and went through all of the basic training and CTD and so on, and wound up qualifying to be trained as a pilot. This meant that I went to Douglas, Georgia for primary training, and for the rest of the time I was in training, I lived in Georgia. The only time that I was ever spend any time in Georgia until I came here to teach. After I completed training, instead of going to a transitional training to learn to fly the combat plane I was going to fly, they decided I could go overseas as a replacement pilot, co-pilot. So when I got there, I'd never been inside a B-17 in my life. The pilot who was going to have me as his co-pilot trained me for 25, 30 hours, and one day we were coming in, he says, well, Bob says, if you were coming back from a mission, do you think you could land this thing now? I said, well, I think so. He says, well, you better be able to, because you're flying a mission tomorrow. So I flew 35 missions, relatively uneventful. We had no one on my crew was particularly harmed. We did have to land on the continent a couple of times. The most fascinating one was the one when we had to come down about 25 miles from Paris, and the plane could not be flown, so we knew that we would probably have to be there for 2 or 3 days while they repaired it, and we took it back to the base. And in those 2 or 3 days, we would then go spend a little time in Paris. Well, about 30 minutes later, they came in and informed us, well, your plane's ready to take you back. We'll bring your plane back to you when it's ready. So there went our trip into Paris. The other one was the time that we flew during the Battle of the Bulge. The Germans were very smart in recognizing that they had a weather opportunity where there would be no air cover for the Allied troops, and that's why they instituted the Battle of the Bulge. Well, on December the 24th, the weather broke and we were able to fly. Excuse me. And we flew the mission and headed back, and about half of the bases were fogged in, and ours was one of them, so we had to go someplace else. We landed on a base where there were about 3 or 4 groups instead of one, and so they put me up in a gymnasium, gave me a fold-out metal cot no mattress. It said sleep fast because you're going to fly in the morning. Well, I scrounged up about 8 of those little British pillows, and that was my mattress. And finally started to sleep about 11 o'clock. Right around the corner from the gym was where the chapel was. It was Christmas Eve. So at 11:30 they started the midnight service. And they sang all the beautiful carols, which I had no use for whatsoever, because I was supposed to fly at about 4 o'clock in the morning. Well, the weather didn't break and we didn't fly, so I got back to the base just after they had served everybody the Christmas dinner. I've forgotten whether we got hardtack or what that night.
That was an interesting Christmas. Was that 44?
44. Mm-hmm. So I finished my tour and came back to the States. I came back on a troop ship. And on May the 8th, when they declared the war in Europe ended, we were in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and nobody on the ship would admit that they had any booze. So I landed in Boston in a snowstorm on May the 13th, good old Southern boy, and ultimately was released in the summer and re-entered Birmingham Southern and completed my degree, taught a year in Montgomery, and then got married, and I had a job. My wife agreed to marry me because I had a job, and decided I'd go to Peabody for my master's degree. So we took off for Peabody, and I completed my master's degree, and she completed her 3rd year of college. And then
that was in Nashville. Y'all were in Nashville at Peabody.
Nashville. So then I decided I really didn't want to work in it yet, so I decided I'd go to Michigan and get my PhD. So we went to Michigan, and I completed my degree up there, and the first job that I had an opportunity to get was one in Georgia. Dr. E.B. Smith, who was the head of the Division of Health Physical Education, was up there for the summer completing his degree, and he offered me a job, a temporary job in Athens, and he said he thought he could probably make it permanent, but he couldn't guarantee it. But he did have a job that was permanent at the Atlanta Division of the University of Georgia. That's now Georgia State University. Well, Red Lawson was supposed to take that job, and I was supposed to go to Athens. But Red talked Dr. Adderholt into letting him take the temporary job and sending me to the permanent job. Well, at the end of the first year, Red was chosen as the basketball coach because Coach Watley at that time was the head line coach, the head basketball coach, the head baseball coach, and he finally told Coach Butts, that's too much. So Red got the basketball job, and that made him a permanent faculty member for the rest of his career. And my permanent job in Atlanta lasted 1 year. And I left there and went to Georgia Military College and taught from 4th grade PE to 7th grade geography to intramurals and coach football. And after 1 year, Dr. Smith asked me to come to Georgia in a permanent position. And in fall of 1952, we came to Athens and moved into Myrna Court like every other young person in Athens did at that time.
And you've been here ever since?
Been here ever since.
We're glad you are. Talk a little bit, the Atlanta division is something that we've not gotten any comments on tape. And, I have a colleague at Georgia Tech who claims they started Georgia State. Can you talk a little bit about the way that was set up? Or
I think it initially started as the Atlanta Evening College, independent, very briefly. And then they affiliated with Georgia Tech. And I don't know what caused the transition, but obviously it wasn't really a very good merger because the Atlanta division was essentially a school to train business leaders.
Right.
And one of its first missions was to utilize the strength of the Atlanta business community. A rather significant part of the faculty were part-time people who were employed in Atlanta, and they would teach in the evening. And gradually the daytime division grew, and the university, it was affiliated with the University of Georgia. And at the time I was there, Dr. Idaho was the titular head of the school. The legendary man there, George Sparks, was the I don't know what the title he had, but he was the on-site director. And we were housed in a former parking garage. And I think it was about 6 floors, and you went between floors using the ramps that the cars did to go from one floor to the next. We did have a gymnasium out in the back, and that's where I spent most of my time.
And look at Georgia State now. Good grief. Interesting to hear how that got off the ground. So, you've had a long and distinguished career at the University of Georgia, and you have witnessed huge changes and growth. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It was fascinating. When I came here, I don't think there were quite 5,000 students. And I taught the required program, and I worked with the intramural program. And at that time, all the graduates paraded across the stage when they got their diplomas. The 5,000 total students, there weren't that many people parading across the stage. I used to joke about the fact that every male that walked across that stage I recognized.
You'd seen them all, right? They'd come through you.
Just about. Well, when I retired, the enrollment was about 22,000. And I told people my job then was principally in graduate study. And at that point, I didn't even know all the majors in our own division.
Yeah.
And since that time, it's gone on to, 34,000. One of the things that happened is in about 1962, we felt that the university had reached 10,000 students, and it really had outgrown Stegman Hall. And it also did not have the real facilities a university of that type should have for recreation, intramurals, and so on. So the division wrote a comprehensive plan to make the university have a quality campus for recreation, physical education, teaching. It included the golf course, the lake, the intramural fields, and incidentally a building to replace Stegman because it wasn't satisfactory. Well, the whole plan is now complete, and they read the report and they built the replacement, Ramsey Center, and opened it in 1997.
It just took 35 years?
So I claim credit for Ramsey.
Well, it is something. It is still a place that we send all of the folks who have a few minutes before our tours, we send down to see Ramsey because it's sort of the breathtaking, awe-inspiring.
I think it's one of the finest recruiting tools that we have.
Oh, it's wonderful.
In fact, with the development of the rest of the East Campus, I think any prospective student, you start them there and you don't have to go anyplace else.
Well, it is one fine facility, I'll say that. Talk a little bit about the relationship between physical education and athletics when Dr. Smith was division head and Coach Butts was athletic director. There was both were housed in Memorial Hall, you told us.
Right.
So there was a symbiotic relationship there, or?
Well, Dr. Smith was in one wing and went around the corner, and Coach Butts and part of the athletic staff was in the other. The rest of it was down in Stegman Hall. And Coach Butts, the athletic department didn't have the money it has now. And of course, physical education never is given very much money by the university. So when Dr. Smith got in a bind, he'd go around and talk to Coach Butts and say, "Do you think that Coach Watley could teach a course in football for us?" And they'd work that out, and then a little later, Coach Butts would come around and says, "Ernie," says, "I need an assistant coach in basketball, but I haven't got enough money. Could you pay part of his salary and have him teach for you and coach for me?" and that worked beautifully. And for as long as they were there, the blend between the physical education faculty and the athletic staff was
complemented one another.
That's right. With Louis Gainey was one of our instructors who became an assistant coach. Track coach Speck Towns and Jim Watley taught the basketball class, the football class, the baseball class. Bunk Gableson was the professor of physical education and coached the swim team. And it was a wonderful relationship, plus the fact that, like I said, the athletics didn't have any money. So when they held scrimmages in the fall before the season or during spring practice, the cheapest officials they could get were the guys that were in the physical education department. So we officiated all the scrimmages that they had in football. And Dr. Smith worked as the timer in basketball, and I worked as his assistant. And it really was. It was just a marvelous relationship.
Cooperative arrangement.
And unfortunately, when the two of them left, it later broke down, and today there's essentially no relationship.
Talk a little bit about the personalities of those two people you mentioned, because they're people we hear about. Talk about Coach Butts.
Well, I'd like to say first of all that the two of them were two of the finest Southern gentlemen I think I've ever known. Coach Butts, born in Milledgeville, I believe, and Dr. Smith, born in Painted Post, New York.
Painted Post.
But he was white-headed, gregarious, the darling of all of the female professionals at our conventions, great dancer, great talker, and a pure gentleman. He treated all the women as ladies in every respect. But as I said, Coach Butts he was as tough as any football coach, and you can talk to any football player and they'll tell you that. But he was also one of the most soft-hearted guys you've ever seen. His alumni could hit him for a loan, which he never got paid back anytime they wanted to. Johnny Roush was a good friend of mine, and he told me about when he came here. He had married before he got here because Coach Butts didn't allow his players to marry. So Johnny just married before he got here. And Coach Butts called him in and he said, Johnny says, we've got an apartment for you, and come back and see me when you get in. And so he said he went back after they got all settled in. He said, Johnny, have you got a freezer locker over in the university? They had a place where you could rent them. He said, no, sir. Says, I don't need one. He says, well, you come over there and you tell them to rent one and send us a bill. He said, well, I don't know what I'd use it for. Said he went back about 10 days later, and Coach Butts says, have you been over to your locker lately? He said, no, sir. He says, well, stop by there on the way out. He said he stopped by and the place was completely stocked with food.
Filled it up. That's a great story. That's a great story. Your involvement with athletics covered lots of different areas, but now you are a sports official for?
All of us, as I mentioned, all of us, what we were getting paid, we had to find some way to make some extra money. So Gableson and Smith and Lawson and several of the others, all of us were high school officials. And as I said, we worked the Georgia scrimmages. We worked high school games in football, basketball. I worked a little bit in baseball, but I was like Coach Watley. That was too much, so I gave up the baseball, but I continued those two until I came back from the last game one basketball season, was sitting with my wife, and she said, Bob, says in the fall, says if we get invited to a party on Friday night, and I'm sitting on this couch, says you're gonna be sitting next to me. So that ended my
that was it. No more Friday nights, huh?
But I did the varsity basketball for a number of years, and I worked the school board, well, in various ways. The original school board, I was down on the field with a microphone and a long cable walking up and down the field, and I would tell the people up in the school board what yard line and how much to go, and they would then slide the numbers into the school board so that it would show. And then, of course, we went into the press box, and I worked there from about 1960 maybe, until the last time I did it was the year that we had the Olympics.
96.
96. And they had put in the new school board, and I worked that year, and at that time, Louis Gainey was then in charge of facilities. He says, Bob, with that new school board, says, I've got to hire 2 technicians to be here for every game to do nothing if the school board works. He says, I'm going to get my money's worth. I'm going to make them work the school board and ask you to retire.
Let you have some time off. You mentioned Coach Gabrielson.
Coach Gabrielson was one of the most interesting men I think I've ever known. He had a PhD from New York University. He taught, well, in the early days, he and a good friend, Dick Tews, and I, and to a certain extent, Red Lawson, taught all of the major program at the University of Georgia. And he and Dick were the only ones that taught the graduate programs, the graduate courses for the master's degree, which is the only thing we had at that time. But he was also the swimming coach. Mm-hmm. And he was notorious for that. He instructed the diving judges before the meet. Said, now to give you an idea of, what score you should consider, said if they do a fair dive, you give them a 5, 5.5. And if they do a good dive, it goes from 6 to 7.5. Excellent, you can go on up to 8. Says now, if a visiting team does a good dive, you give them 6.5. Says if we do a good dive, you give us 7.5. But among other things, he invented a diving board, totally different from anything that had ever been used. Sold it for a while, but for some reason it didn't really catch on. But it was essentially it was a very brilliant engineering concept.
He, like you, had a family of athletes. I know he had Jimmy, who was, and Sherry and Bobby. All of them were.
Three of them were athletes.
And he played golf.
Jimmy,
he played golf really well.
Jimmy was one of the finest golfers that ever played at Georgia. He was All-American at Georgia. He went on to play with the Walker Cup team. He served as captain of the Walker Cup, and he was runner-up in the British Open. Won the state amateur championship about 4 or 5 times. Outstanding golfer.
Fine golf player.
And also a brilliant businessman. As you may know, he personally made a significant contribution toward the aquatic center, which of course bears Bump's name.
Well, now Sherry and Bobby played golf also too.
Yeah,
Sherry met
Jack Lumpkin, Quentin Lumpkin's son, in high school, and for some reason or she didn't get to college. So her golf days ended when she married Jimmy, as far as competition was concerned. But Bobby went on and was a collegiate champion in the days of the women's, what was it called? The American Association of Women's Athletics or something like that. And she won the national championship there and went on to a pro career. And for a brief time, she was assistant to, Bobby was assistant to, Bobby was, which one? Yeah. Was assistant to Jack Lumpkin up in one of the great courses in New York.
Is that right? I didn't remember that. Talk about your family a little bit, your athletes.
Well,
Barbara was.
We have 3 children, and the first one we really liked the name Barbara. And then second one came along, and he had to be Robert T. Jr., and so he became Bob. And then the third one came along, and we named her for her grandmother, Elizabeth, which became Beth.
All 3 B's.
And then we had the next one. We thought Bonnie was a pretty name. And I had an aunt named Bonnie, so we named her Bonnie. And when Bruce came along, that was a family name, so we named him Bruce.
So all the B. Bowens.
So we had 5 Bowens, B. Bowens. And Mike Castranis used to say that he didn't know which one was which, so he just called all of them Bowen.
Sounds like Coach Mike.
Barbara was came along when women's athletics was not really, was almost frowned upon. But she did participate in swimming and diving and tennis in high school, and she was a 3-time state champion in diving. Bob was a very good athlete. He was all-star in Little League Baseball. He played golf. We had a swimming team that used to use the old Memorial Pool as its base, and he swam a year or 2, but he was more interested in golf, so he really quit practicing. But every once in a while, the coach would call up and say, "Bob, we got to meet, and we need somebody to swim a leg on the relay, so you're going to have to be here Saturday." So he'd go down, swim a leg on the relay, and leave, and not come back until called again. But his great love was basketball. I thought he should have played college golf, but I was his assistant golf coach, and I don't think he wanted to play for me. But he went on and played basketball, and started on Ken Roseman's first freshman team. Ken had signed 5 scholarship athletes, and all of them were 6'5" or taller, and none of them had ever handled the ball at all. And so the freshman coach, after about 3 or 4 games, told Bob, says, "Bob, you're starting." He says, "I can't stand this any longer." Well, he warmed up, and they came to the bench just before game, and they announced the starting lineup, and he wasn't in it. So he went down as far down to the end of the bench as he could and sat down, and coach says, "Bowen, get up here." He says, "I told you were going to start," but says, "I got scared." I said, I figured if you were out there on the court and something went wrong, and I had to send one of these guys in to carry an information, says it would never get to the scorer's table. But after that, he was a starting guard on the freshman team during his freshman year. But Coach Roseman wasn't too interested in Southern players at that time, so he went to Western Carolina and played 1 year up there, and then came back and finished at Georgia. Now, Beth was our musician. She swam, and she was a very good swimmer, but athletics was not her thing. But she was a fine musician. She entered the University of Georgia, majored in music education and math education, and learned to play the cello, and finished her bachelor's degree with only 268 hours and 3 majors. Bonnie was the athlete who came to Georgia and participated in gymnastics before Suzanne Yockman came in the days of the AIAW. And they went to the national championship every year that she was in school. And Bruce was our computer geek.
Aren't we glad we've got those now?
He now works for the company in Atlanta, Scientific Atlanta, which is now merged with the big, I can't think what it is now. But he swam a little bit. But athletics was not his thing.
Talk about that brings up a Title IX discussion. What's your view of the? First, explain what Title IX was, please,
well,
sir, and then
what brought about Title IX was that a group of the women professionals began to push for, and they actually formed a national association to conduct women's athletics because the NCAA refused to have anything to do with it. Well, they were so successful that at one point the AIAW had more members than the NCAA. Now they didn't have the money and that sort of thing. But what brought Title IX on was this unwillingness of anybody associated with athletics to support women's athletics. And so the Congress wrote Title IX, which decreed that the equal opportunity should be given to women in athletics. And I was one of the committee, I think I chaired the committee that wrote the first Title IX report for the university outlining how they would comply with Title IX. And in my judgment, it was an essential thing that happened. And it worked, unfortunately, it worked too well. And now Title IX, in my judgment, is abusive to men's athletics. As an example, Ron Polk, who was the baseball coach here, had been at Mississippi State and had the finest baseball program in the South. He had developed the program, raised the funds to build, I think, about a 9,000-seat baseball stadium, sold it out with season tickets, was generating, a great sum of money. And Title IX came in, and Mississippi State said, Ron said, we're going to have to expand our women's softball program. And so they're going to get 22 scholarships, and you're going to get 15.
Yeah.
And that's when he left it. Well, he retired. He quit. And then a year or so later, he came back
to Georgia.
He came to Georgia and was here, and then, of course, went back to Mississippi State and went to the College World Series this year.
So the thought wasn't that it should be taken away from the men. It was just that that's the way the financial end has ended up, the budgeting end, handling it right.
That's the way I guess I'll have to say the powers that be have manipulated it. And unfortunately, part of the reason that this has happened is that the diehard males were saying that Title IX would be the death of college sports. In fact, I had a conversation with Bill Hartman one time, and I said, finally I told Bill, I said, Bill, if you're worried about funding women's athletics, employ a woman in the athletic department to generate funds for the women's sports, just as you do with the men's sports. And he said, we couldn't do that. Bob said if they asked people for money, we'd have to give them football tickets. I said, Bill, if you go to a widow and ask her for money for women's athletics and tell her you're going to give her football tickets, you won't get a nickel. And I said, just remember this, Bill. How many rich widowers do you know?
Not many of those, huh?
How many rich widowers do you know? Plus the fact that if Liz Murphy had gone to Jane Bowen and said, Jane, we need you to give $500 to women's athletics. And Jane thought it was a good idea and came to me and said, Bob, I think we should give $500 to women's athletics. You know what my answer would be? Unless I wanted to sleep on the couch for a month.
Yes,
going to give the
yes,
money.
ma'am.
So they could have funded it. In fact, Alabama did it first, and they did a marvelous job. They had a fundraiser. That's why they were so successful.
Did you work with Liz Murphy?
I know that worked with her. I taught with her when she was teaching in physical education, and I worked with the women's athletics in several ways.
She is a standout as far as the women on this campus are concerned in terms of.
She is probably one of the 15 or 20 greatest women in college athletics in the history of the current college athletic program. She became the head of the program because when Coach Eves decided that he would provide a one-year grant to fund athletics on a temporary trial basis, he decided, well, now I've got to have somebody who will be responsible for administering this. And so they got Liz to do it and to coach the golf team. And she took that, whatever it was, $25,000. And as you know, she built
She did.
women's athletic program to what it is today. She hired Suzanne Yockland. She hired Jack Bowerly. She hired Andy Landers. And she ultimately hired Beans Kelly, who had been one of our players, to take over the golf room. But when she hired Beans, Beans didn't have a degree. So she said, Beans, you're my assistant coach, and you will be until you get your degree. And she told every coach when they came in, said, you make sure that your students graduate, and we do want you to win, but make sure that they graduate. She was totally committed to academics.
She's an impressive person.
She was.
A couple of other names that we need to mention. Dr. Mary Ella Sewell.
She was one of the great women physical educators. She was as respected nationally probably as anybody in the field. And she was a committed teacher, and she was a committed Southern lady. She was a Southern lady, and all of her majors were going to be Southern ladies. And when they went to tea, sometimes at her house, they were supposed to show up in white gloves. She also was absolutely committed to the fact that high-level competitive athletics was an inappropriate thing for women. And she was part of the group that kept girls and women's athletics essentially dormant until another group finally overcame it.
She was of the old school.
Yes, she was of the old school, but she was part of the power structure that kept athletics out of colleges until they finally got defeated.
Talk a little bit about, you've mentioned Coach Lawson a good bit. Talk a little bit about the persona of Red Lawson. He was an interesting fellow.
Oh, he's one of the most amazing people. I must say this about him as a basketball coach. He was not disorganized at all. He was totally unorganized, but he was a brilliant strategist. He could sit down and in 30 minutes design an offensive plan that the rest of the coaches would spend months trying to figure out how to defend it. And on the court, he could totally change the game plan in a flash. But as far as organized management of the basketball program, when he was allowed, he had no assistant coach.
Had to do it all himself.
He did all of it himself, plus teach. In other words, he had to recruit after he got through teaching classes. But when they finally gave him an assistant to do the recruiting, he hired Rex Frederick from Auburn. Rex was a great basketball player at Auburn, and then was a very fine coach. But he came in and he told me that he went in to see Coach Lawson the first day, and he said, "Now, Coach," says, "I know I'm supposed to do the recruiting. Can I look over the file that you have on recruiting?" He said, "Yeah, there's that file cabinet right over there. Look in the top drawer." He said, and he looked in the top drawer, and there were 3 files. But in Red's defense, he really had no time to recruit. I mean, he had to teach a class, and he couldn't go to Florida or to Louisiana or to Michigan to seek a recruit.
Talk a little bit about Woodruff Hall, too. That's where he had to play.
Oh, yeah. That is a legendary place. Claude could probably tell more stories than I could about it. But Woodruff was built, I think, in the 20s. And it was a palace. It was a marvelous feature. Well, when I got here, it was a little bit archaic. It was a little bit run down. And sometime the roof leaked. In fact, Red once said that he was at a disadvantage to the rest of the coaches in the conference because he always had to build in funds for a lifeguard when they played games. And they were playing a game one time, and the floor was wet, and a couple of towels down on the floor. And one of the players came down the floor, and he hit one of the wet spots, and he slipped. And the official said, "You're running with the ball." And Fats Keller, another legend of Athens,
Fats Keller.
always never missed a game. He was standing there, and he yelled out in a voice only he could, "Hell no, Mr. Ref. He's treading water. He wasn't running with the ball." Oh, and another thing about Woodruff is that I think it was Coach Watt. They beat Coach Rupp in Woodruff Hall in about 1948, 49 or so. And Coach Rupp says, "Coach, that's the last time we will ever play a game in Woodruff Hall." And he didn't. That's why Red played one of the Kentucky-Georgia home games in Bowling Green, Kentucky.
Coach Rupp wasn't coming back.
Coach Rupp ran the Southeastern Conference basketball for many, many years. He ran the schedule. He ran the officials that called the games that he was involved in. He ran the show.
And Kentucky still can't get over Coach Rupp, can they?
That's
They
right.
just...
I had one other story. I was a timer for a freshman game between Kentucky and Georgia. And Joe B. Hall, who was his successor, was coaching the freshman team. The game ended in a tie. We went into overtime. And about 3 minutes into the overtime, Coach Rupp came up to the scores table, and he said, "This game's over." Georgia was leading by 2 points. And Coach Hall wasn't very happy, and nobody else really did. He says, "We are taking the floor. Get these people off the floor."
It was time for him to appear, huh?
It was time for them to start practice. One time he stopped the start of the game because he said, "The basket on that end is not right." I said, "What do you explain it? Yes, coach says it's not right measured. It was 2 inches off, and they had to delay the game for 5 minutes while they adjusted it.
He knew his business. You were here through the 50s, and as the 50s moved along, there was a change blowing through the South, and the desegregation movement began, and we knew here that there was a change in the air. Talk to us a little bit about 1960, 1961, those times.
Well, I'd like to tell another story about Meade Field, who was a law professor, and during that time, he was called on oftentimes to go around the state and explain what was happening with the legal issues of desegregation, and he had this speech. Well, he went to South Georgia and he gave the speech, and he said, now this is the way it's going to do, and he laid it out that the legislature would do this, and then this would happen, and this would happen. He says, and then eventually we will desegregate. He said a white-headed gentleman with a cane stood up, pounded on the floor 3 times. He says, when that happens, we'll fight, and this time we'll win. But actually, the desegregation at Georgia, in my judgment, went extremely well. I will say that the riot started after Georgia played Georgia Tech in basketball. The game went into overtime. The clock malfunctioned, and ultimately Roger Kaiser sank the winning basket in overtime as the buzzer went off and time had expired. I won't go into that, but time had expired before you shot. But the shot was counted, they won the game, and I'm confident that about half of the spectators, particularly the students, left the game and carried their protest to the dormitories and joined the crowd there, which of course consisted of about 50% of people from anywhere from Augusta and Athens to Michigan probably. And Dean Tate did his usual brilliant job and avoided any real problem. Of course, then the 2 students were placed in the dormitory. Well, actually, the girl was placed in the dormitory. Hamilton was placed in the home of one of the people, the Athens citizens. They had a pretty bad time in that there were rabble rousers on the campus all the time. I don't think that the majority of the student body, it made much difference to. The faculty totally supported the desegregation. In fact, the faculty held a meeting as one of the biggest faculty meetings to indicate that they totally, and developed a resolution that they totally supported what was being done. And in my judgment, as far as the faculty was concerned, it was over and done, and there may have been a few diehards, but to the faculty, they were students, and that it didn't make any difference. Now, the 2 students had a very lonely life, but I think that what they have done since they left here indicates that they appreciated the fact that they were allowed to do what they did. And I think the recognition that's been given to those 2 was totally fitting, and we certainly chose well when we chose the first 2.
Outstanding people. Another episode in our history, the Jan Kemp affair.
I was pretty close to that, and I find it extremely interesting exactly what happened. They created this special studies program for students, not just athletes, but any students who could be admitted but had deficiencies in core program, basic, mostly English and math. And they had 1 year in which to improve those qualities and move into the regular program. And those courses did not count toward graduation. Well, unfortunately, the athletic department had students that didn't quite make it at the end of the year, and so they put them back in the program. And it got to be a bit of an abuse, I think. And Jan Kemp had been made the director of the program. And she got upset with it and began to raise a lot of cane, and they fired her. Now, she was an assistant professor with no tenure. She was appointed by whoever her superior was and served at his discretion. So there was no reason that she shouldn't have been fired, as far as legally. But they fired her. And of course she sued, and in my judgment, the lawyers decided that the thing that they had to do was make sure that they protected the president and the football coach and the athletic director and all those. And so that's the way the case was tried. Unfortunately, it was also tried in front of a judge who had been denied admission to the University of Georgia into the law school during the desegregation era. So of course he probably didn't have any chance anyway. But the way that they tried the case, in my judgment, gave them no chance whatsoever. If they had stuck to the condition that what they did was legal, they might have had a chance to do something. But again, I said, I don't think Horace Ward would have let them get away with anything. So it really was a fiasco.
And it was from day one almost, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
As we followed along on the testimony from day to day,
Yeah, it was a pathetic defense, but it probably had no chance anyway. So what?
And of course, it ended up with a president resigning.
Well, the worst thing was that the vice president of faculty of affairs, who had absolutely nothing to do with what was going on, wound up with legal fees that almost broke her. And she had, the only thing that she did was, as far as athletics was concerned, was when the president told her, she went and sat in the president's box for a football game. I don't think she ever sat in the stands the entire time she was here. She had no interest in athletics.
And ended up bearing the brunt.
She was the scapegoat. And as you said, of course, ultimately it really contributed to the fact that President Davison left. It was a sad day.
It was a sad time, and I think the morale on campus suffered terrifically.
Mm-hmm. But Henry King Stanford came in and did a brilliant job.
He did a wonderful job.
I mean, that was one of the greatest turnarounds I have ever seen in an institution, to a man to come in 1 year, completely turn the atmosphere of the campus around.
He really did. That was you felt better about things when he was there.
By the time the new president came in, the campus were ready to say, okay, all right, let's go. Let's move forward.
Exactly right.
Past is over with, forget it, we're ready to go.
Exactly.
And we did.
Talk to us some of the things that I know you are proud of. Of course, and remind me exactly now what we call our division.
Well, it was. It's no longer called that. It was called originally the Division of Health, Physical Education. It was actually the Department of Health, Physical Education, and Recreation when I came.
Right.
And then we were given a little more autonomy in terms of controlling the budget and such by getting the title of division. And the idea was that it would eventually be separated from the College of Education and made a separate college, but that never came to pass. And when I came here, we had a bachelor's and a master's degree, and essentially the master's degree was in physical education. There was an undergraduate degree in recreation, and no degree program in health at that time. And then during the time that I was associated, the first thing that I was involved with was the driver education program to teach children to drive. Started in the early 50s, and Dr. Smith decided that I should be the one that would teach the driver education. So he sent me to New York University for 2 weeks in order to learn all that I needed to know to teach in college, teachers of driver education. And I told people that about 2 years after I got back, I finally absorbed all that they threw at me in those 2 weeks. But we started, and for a number of years, that's all I taught in the summer. I took 2 classes of driver education, and there would be anywhere from 30 to 35 teachers in each one. Taught in Stegman Hall, and I taught consecutively from 8 to 12. We had no air conditioning, so we had to open the windows. And the parking lot was right outside, so by the time noon came around, I had to quit talking till the next morning in order to be able to talk, but I started class the next day. But that program, I left that program after a while, and of course it went on to become a very relatively high quality program in safety education, with a program designed to train people in other aspects of safety education other than just driver education. I was involved in the development of the specialist degree that we offered, and also the doctoral program. And this program, before we started, the Midwest, anybody that was hired in a southern institution pretty much came from the Midwest, which was the center of advanced graduate study in the nation. Our program now, the doctoral graduates are now in places all over the country. Some of them in the Big Ten schools, which was the source of all of our doctoral students at that time. The other program that I'm particularly proud of is the program in sports management. This is a program that trains people to manage sports, the college level, the pro level, and in large school systems, the director of athletics is running a big business, and so some of the graduates would go in and be the director of athletics for, say, the Gwinnett County schools, and so on. But others would have gone to other universities. They've managed arenas like the Omni. One of them is at West Point in their athletic program. And 2 I'm particularly proud of. One of our first graduates is an associate athletic director at North Carolina State. And one of the ones that completed the program after I retired is the director of athletics at the University of Georgia.
And it's doing a good job.
We started, and the first thing I said is that we are not going to have more than 30 students in this program at any time. And we still don't. So we've placed everybody pretty well. And now they screen as many as 75 students for 15 places and interview 25 or so to choose the ones that they allow in the program.
Dr. Bowen, speak to us a little bit. We were talking about names, and I know it went from a physical education department through a number of other iterations, but now it's health and human performance. Can you tell us a little bit about that title and what it encompasses and your
Quite
perspective?
frankly, I don't know what it means. The people that did it wanted to get away from physical education. That was a dirty name, and they did all sorts of manipulation and ultimately came up with health and human performance. And when I heard that, I said, human performance. Let's see, that means next year we take over the drama department, and the year after that we take over the music department, and the next year we take over the mechanical drawing, because all of those are human performance. Well, of course, obviously, we've got to take over the art department. It's a name that has absolutely no relationship to what they're supposed to be doing. Now, what they're doing now, I don't know. So maybe it fits.
Talk a little bit about Coach Mike Castranas.
He's one of my favorite men to talk about. Coach Mike, I first knew him when he was a high school coach. He coached football and he coached girls basketball, and he was one of the finest high school girls basketball coaches in the state. And all of his players and all of his cheerleaders and all of the students loved Coach Mike. One of my daughters was a cheerleader at Athens High School when he was football coach there, and they developed a wonderful relationship. Coach Mike's career it's almost impossible to describe. He coached in high school, he coached college, he coached varsity football, he coached freshman football, he taught physical education, and he, for a period of time, he was in charge of the cheerleaders. And I'm sure there are two or three things that I can't think of at this time that he did. And in every instance, and he worked in as the assistant to Dean Tate.
Dean Amend's office.
And was involved with the period of integration. And one of the things that he had to handle were the fraternities. And he did it successfully for the most part, as well as anybody can handle fraternities. But his wife is equally as interesting a person, and she's still around. And whenever we go to a concert at the university, about half the time we're sitting within 5 to 6 seats of her, because we all are so old that we retain squatters' rights in some of the better seats.
He was one of those people like Dean Tate, who I think particularly made an impression on students.
Well, the interesting thing was he was very much like Dean Tate, but his style was almost totally different. And actually, as I understand it, there would be times when Dean Tate would make sure that he assigned something to Mike, because he knew Mike could handle it better than he could.
Oh. Have you got anything you'd like to add to what we've already talked about today?
No, I think we probably worn out the topic.
Covered up.
I will close with saying that I too was a fairly decent athlete, and at one time I was a pretty good golfer. But I've reached the age where I go out on the course and I walk around the course and I don't play golf anymore. What I play is golf spelled backwards. F-L-O-G.
Well, just being out there. I had a mom and dad who both played golf, and there was something about just being out on the course.
Oh, I have a good friend the same age as I am, and he complains about his game, and I said, don't forget, Adrian, I says, most of the people that you used to play golf with ain't here anymore.
That's right. Just being able to get out there. We appreciate so much you being with us today and appreciate you sharing your thoughts. And this will be a wonderful addition to our media archives.
Thank you. I've had a lot of fun with it, and it's always fun to be with you.
Thank you, Bob.